Welcome to Rauta's Death Metal Reviews. This time we go to the world that is pretty much of a roller coaster throughout the years. Antropomorphia is the name of the game here, and after 6 years or so, they are here back with a new album featuring a pierced skull. Now, if that isn't death metal enough for you, I don't know what is, but let's take a look at this digipack release that came out recently. Now, back in 2019, when they released their previous album, we were pretty stoked about the album. It was indeed a really good one and got me really interested what's going on. Unfortunately, this new album isn't exactly the same quality. Devoid of Light it is called, and gives a little bit of death metal mixed with black metal thing. I was trying to figure out why there is this difference in terms of quality and maybe even songwriting too, but it isn't because of the lineup, so something else has changed. But before we get into that, let's take a look at this album properly, which is pretty fucking sweet if you ask me. I mean, I totally like the design here, the colors chosen, the way things are presented, very top-notch aesthetics works. So if you're a fan of the music and you're thinking of, securing a copy, yeah, this is definitely worth the money in terms of physical presentation. But like I said, first let's take a look at the band's background. This comes from the Netherlands, which has never been exactly the big country in terms of extreme metal, even though obviously Netherlands does have some old school death metal acts. And technically speaking, Antropomorphia is one of those names. After all, they started already in 1990s. But that first era didn't last for more than a decade, because by 1999, after one album, they were gone for 10 years. And then they came back with full force, ever more active. And after since, what you see here is 5 different albums. And especially the early years after the comeback was pretty active. Albums coming out every 2 or 3 years. So, yeah. Now, 6 years later, something, however, seems a little bit changed. And like I said, I really like the album prior to this one, Merciless Savagery. But Devoid of Light, yeah, that's a pretty interesting one because it's different. And if you take a look at the lineup, there are a couple of original members still in the band and then some newer members. However, these were present with the previous album. But talking of Devoid of Light, this delivers you quite a traditional take, meaning 9 tracks in 42 minutes. After all, we have gotten used to that every album has pretty much 8 to 10 tracks. It's about 45 minutes or so. That's the typical take, and obviously there's nothing wrong with that format. So far, so good, so safe. And that's the question of the day. Now, Devoid of Light is obviously, showing you the level of professionalism, what you would expect from a bands of these days. Whether it comes for production, handling the instruments or vocals, there's nothing really to complain about. And then you will be asking, so what's the issue really? Now, first of all, Devoid of Light is very easy to listen to. There are no points which get me like frustrated or annoyed or obnoxious or whatever. So there's nothing fundamentally wrong. But if you're asking, what is this missing in terms of Merciless Savagery and all? And I'm like, the really good songs. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want to be the negative Joe here. Everything here is done, like I said, pro and solid ways, meaning it is a kind of an album that you get just listen and true, and then you kind of feel like it's more or less going to the background. And for some people, this is the bigger curse than saying the album is just full of shitty riffs and all, because a lot of people feel like they have really disappointed the audience or whatever, fans, when they become a background music. But let me ask you this. Would you rather do a shitty album than an okay album that's on the background? Now, for me, the answer is pretty obvious. I can live with an okay album. I can live with decent album even if they don't go to my record collection. But for shitty albums, I feel like grabbing a shotgun and firing some shots. So my point here with the Devoid of Light is, it seems like the band is now in a crossroads, figuring out what to do. Maybe there has been some kind of a drama, I don't know. And that is probably something like 6 years was taking time to finish this album. Like I said, there is nothing wrong exactly, but the album is not filled with these good riffs and memorable songs or punch that makes you feel so much alive, blood running from your nose and all. So for me, Devoid of Light is more like, okay, wait for it. We're gonna do this album and then we know what we're actually gonna do. A transition phase, if you will. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, well, they backpedal and go back to their more traditional death metal and all. But now it seems they're a little bit what Behemoth had at some point, as some kind of a identity crisis. Like, do we want to go for blackened death metal? Do we want to go back to traditional death metal? Do we want to go somewhere else? That's a question that remains unanswered with this album. Like I said, pretty solid release in the sense of, easy to listen to and no complaints about the production. But once again, the actual real killer songs are missing. And for that, for some people, it might be a deal breaker. Obviously, this is just my opinion and you're supposed to have your own. So you give it a go if you think modern death metal is something you are ready to listen to. And when I say modern, I don't mean deathcore, I don't mean overly technical approach to death metal. It's just something that doesn't really sound like it's coming from the 80s or 90s, because there's a lot of old school death metal revival thing going on. So that needs to be mentioned in a band, with the band like this that has been around for 35 years or so. Or at least got born some 35 years ago. Now give it a go. Links are provided in the description, and figure out if this is your cup of tea. And even if you didn't like this one, go for the previous one. At least that's a really, really solid, good release and should give you something that you're asking for, even if Devoid of Light is somehow missing out on something. Now off you go, enjoy, and should you have any questions or comments, drop me a message on the comments box below. Bye.